All right, so in this video, we're going to concentrate on making the belly pan. What you're going to end up with is the finished template out of 1/4" Luan like that. And I'll just show you how I went about figuring out all these angles and everything else. You notice right here, there's a notch here. If you go back to I think it was the second video, I had this pivot point up here, which you can do either, but I ended up doing this one. If you do have the plate that bolts in here with the pivot point on it for the trailing arm up here, just take it right off at this time and get it right out of your way. But before you do, actually, if the pivot point's here and it's coming out here, just mark a center line right there before you pull it off, because you're going to need that after to transfer that to this here, because once you get this finished up, you'll put this in here, everything's cut, that'll be cut. You just mark your center line and then measure up, and then you can figure out where your trailing arm's your pivot point's gonna poke out through. So we're gonna start off first with a piece of cardboard. And this is like 23 inches by 16, which is way more than I need. And I'm just gonna put it up there. This point here has to come below this, so the tie rod's in the way. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and mark that rough, and take my knife and just cut that out. Doesn't have to be pretty. You want to make sure that you're hanging below this point, which I have to go a little bit more. All right, so now I know I'm low enough there. Now the other issue I have is figuring out this cut here. So I'm going to just kind of take note of the way it goes. And then just imagine it right there. And just cut that. And you just want to kind of make little cuts and get closer and closer to it. So when you're happy with that, when I'm hitting on the bolt right here. So I'm going to put that right in place. And I'm just going to push the cardboard in. And if you can see right there, you can see where that bolt is. So I'm going to cut that out. Keeping it pretty tight to the imprint that the bolt left. So you're right where you want to be. You have this bolt here. You're hanging lower. This cardboard's lower than the actual belly pan itself. All the way up through here. Now you have that. You can just kind of take a peek behind the cardboard and see where this chain case is. And right about there is the intersecting point of the chain case. And right about here is where I want it. So I'm just going to connect these dots, this dot and that dot. You see when it's in there, this was that touching point that I had, so I just took the line from there and just went straight up. I'm only going to go to this point here. I'm going to save the rest of this cardboard for more templates. And so I cut that straight line right there. I'm not super happy with it. I don't know if you can see it in the video or not. But I have about 1/8 of an inch away from the chain case there, and it's touching here, so I'm going to go and mark that about 1/8 of an inch away. Go make another cut. back in. Pretty happy with that. Now I'm hitting on the chain case down here. So I'm just going to take a little bit out of that. And I'm going to clean up this cut here because the bolt head is smaller than the actual chain case itself. So as you can see, it's kind of mashing it up, but I'm just going to kind of clean it up a little bit. Take a little off there. And then this is what I have to take off the bottom to make it tight. So I'm happy with my cut here, the way everything fits along here and down here. So next we have to do is mark this, because the bottom of the belly pan has to follow this profile here. So what I did, and I haven't done this before, I'm trying it now, is I just put a little grease on the edge of that all the way up and through. And I'm going to put this in, and when I get it where I want, I'm just going to rub it. Make sure the cardboard doesn't move when you start this. And I'm just going to rub it right up that whole flange. And hopefully, yeah, that'll work pretty good. So, and the other thing I want to do is, you can see where this comes up here. That's right here. I actually want to be cutting this straight through like that. Straight through like that. So, put that back in where I want it. The more times you move this around, the more marks you're going to end up with the grease marks. So do it as little as possible. So I'm just going to mark the top of this flange right here, because there's actually a little 45 notch on here, so you got to kind of come out and make that mark. But that's the mark right there, and then I'm just going to go straight across with it. Like that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that. So just pop that in there now. That actually worked out pretty slick. I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I want to do is, there's another bolt underneath here that we're going to have to cut around. So I'm popping in there and do the same thing. Just push it down. I get the center of it right there. So that's a much bigger bolt on the bottom, so I just kind of drew that in. And I'm going to go cut that out, the pencil line. So I got both the bolts cut out on the bottom. So that fits in like that. I'm happy with that. Now, if you have your pivot point up here, like we talked about earlier, you're going to put that in there. And remember the mark I told you to make right here where the pivot point came out. Now you're going to take this, find that mark, and just mark that. And that's going to be the center of your pivot point for your trailing arm. So the diameter on that piece is actually 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to make this notch 1 inch total. So I'm going to come over 3/8 from this side, and from the center I'm going to go over 3/8. And before you take that off, earlier like I said, mark that pivot point. We'll mark that pivot point, but measure up to the top of that pivot point as well. So if it's up here, you can have like inch and 1.5 to the top of it. So I go like 1 5/8 inches to the top of it. So from this point here, I'd go up 1 5/8 inches. Just draw that straight line over there like that. And then I would just take a socket or something and just draw the round out on that. That way when you put it down in there like that, it'll look like that. So your pivot point for your trailing arm is just going to pop out here. So next thing I want to do is mark up off the bottom of here 4 inches to your chain case and just put a mark there. Not sure where I came up with that 4-inch number, but that's what it worked on, how it worked out on the last one. And I want to mark this edge of the old shock mount on the back side of this, like right here. So I'm going to pop that in there. And I'm going to mark where the shock mount is. Pop that back in there. At this point, you should be happy with how tight it is here on the bottom, all this and that. All I'm going to do, right where the top of the shock mount is, I'm going to go over and I'm going to come down. Actually, I'm going to come down to this point here where this ties in. And I'm going to make a mark there. And I'm also going to make a mark, that 4-inch mark. And then I'm just going to connect these dots with a straight edge. And that's where I'm going to make the cut. So that's what the piece looks like now. I just got to cut it out. It's hitting the boot on the back side. So I'm going to put it back in where it goes. Again, try to figure out the boot's about this high. And I just kind of freehand a little bit of an arc to it. Kind of makes it flow. So I get that all in. I get this arc cut. It's not hitting the boot anymore. Pretty happy with everything except for this here. There's about an 1/8 gap right there. So I'm just going to write on there to add an 1/8. But everything else looks good. But if you're falling short somewhere and you don't like it, just write on there to add 1/4, 1/8, whatever you need to add to make it tight. And then we're going to transfer this onto a piece of Luan. So I'm just going to put that right on there. I'm going to draw it all out, cut it all out, and then we'll work on, there's actually 3 pieces to this whole thing. There's a side piece, then there's an underneath piece here, and then you have the piece that comes up. So let's finish up this piece right now. So you can see how my holes are a little rough. So what I did is just going to find a small socket that's kind of similar in size, and then use that to scribe it, and that'll give me a nice perfect circle, nice clean lines that I can work with. And as you can see, that looks way better. Now the next thing I did is take another piece of Luan, 3/4 of an inch wide, just 1/4 inch Luan, and I cut a 22.5 degree miter on the end, and that's going to go right there. What I did is I left it a little long, so I put that in where I wanted it to be. It's going to be a bit of an angle. This is the block we're going to use. That's a 22.5 degree miter also. So that's going to sit there, and that's just going to hold this piece at the angle it needs to be. And then you just kind of slide it in until it's tight over here, and then you'll mark it right up here. Like I said, leave it a little long and mark it. Obviously I already did that, so that's what you end up with. So we're going to go ahead and screw this right there, and then screw this block on here through the back side, and then this block we're going to screw this right down to the top, and that'll hold that where it needs to be, so we can figure the rest of it. All right, so I have this block screwed on through the back side. I'll pop that back in there. Take my piece with the angle on it and slide it down until it hits the chain case. And check it up here, and that's good. We'll put a screw down through the top of that. And I'll hold that right there, and that's what you end up with. And the reason we're doing this whole bump out is because when we get up here, we're going to flare it out a little bit more, like this. And that's going to get us enough clearance so that it doesn't hit the motor. And the other thing I want to mention while we're talking about the motors, I took the motor out of this, put it back in my other sled. I know what the measurements are, so I know I'm going to have enough clearance. So just make sure when you do this that the motor's mounted. That way you make sure you can get around the recoil starter and have the clutch on it to make sure that you're going to be far enough away from that. That's what I'm going to do now. Is I'm going to take another block, same 22.5-degree miter on it. I'm just going to sit it right on top of there, and then I'm going to put a screw up through here. And that's what it's going to look like. So the whole thing, this is going to be straight up and down. This bumps out a little bit, that bumps out a little bit. So the whole thing tapers up and out from the bottom. Get that in there, get that. The other thing I want to mention is don't, at any point, you don't want this point here to stick up any higher than the original shock mount, because the block off plate is going to come straight across here. And then your channel for your cowling is going to follow right along the top of this and right along the top of here and flare out there somewhere. So just keep that in mind. Don't ever get, stay low. Make sure you stay a little bit lower than that. So now once I have that block stuck on there, everything's kind of tapering out, I'm going to use that to give me the orientation of this next piece, which is just going to hit the chain case just a scooch. So what I'm going to do is just going to cut that like that for now. So I got my block on there, here. I ended up putting a screw in from the back side. I don't know if you can just see the tip of it poking out there, but I just wanted to hold this piece tight to the tunnel because it was flopping around all over the place. Now it's all somewhat rigid, so you can fit this piece. Again, they drew kind of a rough angle. I'm going to put another clamp in there. All right, so I put another clamp in down here. Now it's somewhat rigid. It's not flopping around all over the place. Put this piece up there. I'm happy with the angle here. It matches the chain case. So I'm going to grab another screw. I'm going to screw it right to that block. All right, so the pieces are all screwed. Everything's in there. Pretty solid. It's not flopping around all over the place. So should get pretty accurate measurement. The first thing I'm going to do is go to the top of the shock tower, and that's where I'm going to mark this side piece here. And then I'm going to measure up off the ground to that mark, which is about 20 inches. So I'm going to go over here and mark this at 20 inches. Then I'm going to connect those dots. And cut that. So that's what it looks like all cut up. There's two ways you could do this. I'm going to try to make this all out of one piece of metal and just bend it in the brake. The other thing you could do is you could just cut the 3 individual pieces and just weld them together, and just use your 22.5-degree blocks for gauges when you're tacking it together, and that'll keep all the angles right. The other thing is I cut this now, but when I do with the metal, I'm actually going to leave it a little bit longer, probably up here somewhere. That way, if it changes at all, I don't short myself on material, and then I'll do the same thing after it's all tack welded together and I have it bolted in here with brackets. Then I'll go ahead and measure it off, see if I like the way it looks, and then make that cut, and that'll be the final cut. And then we're going to make up an H channel that's going to go right up in here, and the cowling is going to sit right in there. Let's take a quick look at the other side. I do want to mention that this flange here on the Polaris is a lot wider. The Skidoo is probably like 3/4 of an inch. So this piece here is going at quite a bit more of an angle from back to front. With the Polaris, it's going to be more square that way. The more I'm doing this, the more, if you have a choice, I would use the Polaris chassis and not the Skidoo chassis. It's a lot easier. So I just wanted to point that out real quick, that this is going to taper like that, from that to that being here. And then we're just going to put a couple little L brackets up underneath behind it, like one here and probably one up here. And then this is going to be held in, the whole top will be held in by that H channel that we build that goes all the way around and ends up receiving the cowling. Okay, so on the left side, I think pretty much the same to this point. It's actually a little easier than the other side because you don't have to cut around the chain case. This panel is a little bit longer. It's going to come back here. It's going to come up like this. So for reference, if you held your tape to the center of the drive shaft and come over about 3 inches is about where that's going to stop. So that'll give you a good reference point. And what you're going to do is you're going to get the cut, fit in there, get it fit up over here. Let's see. Nice and tight, get everything where you want it. And then this piece is a little different. It's going to taper from 1.5 inches to about 1/2 inch and 29 inches. So you get about 1/2 inch there. And that is going to go right on your, you have your block in here. I have a screw up here so it's not flopping around all over the place. I'll just put that clamp, no, I can't put that clamp there, it's in the way. So this angle here ended up being a 38-degree angle. What you're going to do is you're going to sit it right on top of that block, 22.5-degree miter, and you can see how that fits right tight there. And if you look up underneath, it's going to be tight. So once you get that where you want it, put it right there, make sure everything's tight. And then you're going to come up here and you're going to mark the top piece right there. All right, so I mounted this piece here on top. I screwed in there to the block underneath, and there I had 2 blocks on this one. So then the next step is to put 2 more blocks on the top here and screw them up from the underneath. And everything to this point, all the blocks, I don't know if you notice the angle on them, everything's tilted out this way, the bottom one and this one as well. So the further away you get from the bottom, the wider it is, and that leaves you plenty of room for your clutch and your motor and all that good stuff. And the other thing is the drive shaft here on the jack shaft is actually going to get cut back here somewhere, but we're going to cut that later. So with that all set, I made up this piece just like the other side, same process. Put it up there a little bit long. And then I went ahead and measured off the floor 20 inches to the top. 20 inches to the top, just connected to 2 dots. And then I made a plumb cut on this as well. So that's pretty much it for the belly pan. The next step is just to cut your metal, and like I said, you can either weld it, the 3 pieces together, or you can bend them up if you have a break. So that's what it's going to look like. And then I have the block off plate in there. And the other thing is, if you notice where the intersection point of this here is with the spindle for the trailing arm, see where it's right about there? Same thing on the other side. It should be right about there when all is said and done. And that way, if you're tight here and tight there, everything should be the same angle. So the next thing we're going to do is make up the side pieces out of metal, get those all fastened in, and then we'll make the cowling channel that goes around all 3 sides. So belly pan plate's all made up. I just made the bends on it, and the way I did that is I took the template apart. Before I did, I actually marked a mark there and a mark there, and then I just took everything apart and laid it flat on a piece of steel, and then just traced it all out. And then I marked my 2 bending points on either end and just scribed the line. And that's where I got that bend and that bend. And came up pretty good, pretty happy with it. Like I said, the other thing you can do if you don't have access to a brake is you can just cut the pieces individually and just weld them along the seams. So now that that's done on both sides, I got this in here. Again, this point is flush with the top here, and then the block off plate is the same thing. It's flush with the top. And the next step is going to be to build the little horseshoe, I guess you would call it, that's going to receive the cowling. And what I did is I made it up similar. This is the shape it's going to be. And it's just going to sit right on top like that. So once I did that, I used that for my actual measurements. And I got some rough lengths. I got 3 rough lengths. I got that one, I cut 24. That one I cut 23. And then the longer one I cut on this side is 30 inches. The cowling is actually going to come all the way around here. And the channel is going to stop here, but the cowling is going to go past it. And there's going to be a little cutout in that for where the muffler comes out as well later. But for now, what I have to do now is I have these 2 pieces, which I think are the front piece. And again, they're just a rough length. But what I'm going to do is we're going to weld them up like that. This is going to be the actual channel that the cowling is going to sit in. So the way I did that is I just took a piece of pine and I cut it to fit. Make sure it's flush here. and flush there, and then all I'll do is I'll clamp it just like that. Everything will be flush. I'm going to put a couple tack welds in it there, and that's going to hold it all together, and then this will be one solid piece, and then we'll fit it in here and then cut the miters on it after. When you do this, just make sure you don't clamp it too tight, because if you do, you're going to have a hard time getting this piece of wood out. And the other thing I did on this, I actually chamfered this edge here because the inside of this has a little bit of a round to it. And what you ultimately want is you want that to be nice and flush there and nice and flush there. Okay, so now I have the pieces tack welded together, and that's going to be the completed piece looks like. I just put two tack welds, one there, and then one on the inside right above each of those. What's going to happen after is you're going to grind this off in that one, because when you put the block off plate in there, it's going to sit like that, and then your block off plate is going to sit like that, and then you're just going to screw it right into that steel. But in order to do that, now we have to make a notch here that's going to go around this. So the way I did that, and I just want to say this, this is just 1.5 inch by 1/8 inch steel and 3/4 inch angle, and 1/8 inch thick as well. So what I'm going to do is just put this right on top. You want to sit this part here right on top of here. So again, I said I made it long, so I just split the difference. Get 2 3/8 there and 2 3/8 there. Most of that's getting cut off, but it's better to be too long than too short. And then what I'm going to do is take a marker and just mark up underneath right where this is going to sit. Because what you're going to end up with is putting there, you're going to mark that, and then you're going to have a couple of lines. And then you're going to have to transfer that to the back. And what you ultimately want to end up with is that. And we're going to cut this out here. And we're going to cut this out here, and then just spin it around. And that's where it's going to sit. Just like that. And the way I figured that angle is I just used sliding T-bevel, and I put it on like that. I take the mark that I made underneath here. I just put the T-bevel on there and lined it up. So it was parallel. And then what I did is I transferred this mark here to the back side, and I just did that. That's where I got that. And then a little trick to make this easy is for this notch here, just take a cut off from that piece of 3/4 angle and just flush it right up, and then just draw that line, and that'll give you that notch. So that's what that piece is going to look like. And then for this piece, for the side pieces, the same thing. When I take this is going to sit right on top of here, just like that, except this way. And the way I get the angle on that is take the same T-bevel, put the plastic right on this edge, and just get it down till I get that angle. And once I get that angle, that's what it's going to be. I'm going to take this piece here and just sit it right on top of the side panel of the belly pan. And I'm going to hold this about 1.5 inches past this point, because the channel on this piece coming across is actually going to stick out 1 inch. So if you go 1.5 inches, you left yourself plenty. And just make sure you got enough length on this end. That's why I said make everything long. So right where this point is here is going to be the long point of this cut. That's going to go this way. So I'm going to mark it right there at that intersecting point. And what I already did is I drew that 3/4 inch line just like on the front pieces. So now I'm going to take my bevel, put it right on there. And draw that out. So that's what that cut's going to have to be. And that should drop right in there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, I have my pieces all notched out. Like that. This is the front piece. It's got 2 notches. And that's going to sit right here. So what I want to do is I want this face here on this piece, on the 1.5 inch, 1/8 inch steel. I want that flush with the edge right before it starts rolling off into the weld. So I'm just going to hold it up there, put it where I want it, right on the edge, and then I'm going to mark it, which I did right there. And that measurement I'm just going to tape off. The front is 7/16, so I'm going to do the same thing on that side, put a mark, 7/16. And I'm going to take what we're doing here is we're getting the short point measurement for this side piece. So this edge here is riding on top of this. I'm going to slide it back, and I'm just going to bring it forward till it starts riding up too high, where it's actually coming up off this backside edge. And then once I get it there, I'm just going to mark this right here. Yeah. So that's going to be my short point for a 41-degree angle. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm going to go set it up on my chop saw and cut that miter. But before I do that, I want to put a tack weld in this. Up to this point, I only have 2 tack welds in it. So I want to put a tack weld in here, like right before the miter. So maybe like back in here, over here, the cut's going to be there. That way this isn't flopping around while I'm trying to cut it. But I'm not cutting through the weld either. I'm going to try to give you a close-up of this. So I got my miter cut on that. And if I put it on the panel and I slide it where this short point is with my old mark, and I make sure that I'm tight here on the metal, and everything's pushed up tight here, I can see that I'm about 1/8 of an inch away. There's about an 1/8 inch space in there, right where this mark is. So what I'm going to do is just take a measurement from, or actually not even, I'm just going to take the piece that goes on the front. If I can find it. I'm going to put it where it goes. And I'm just going to mark it. So you can see this. Right where it goes. And I'm just going to mark it 1/8 of an inch away from here. If it's a little big, that's all right. And I'm going to do the same thing on that side. So right there, that's going to be my short point, and that's my other short point. So I'll do the same thing. I'll just put a little tack weld in here, and then I'll go over to the saw and cut those. All right, so almost 3 pieces, all the miters are cut. I'm going to say, if you're going to ask me one tool that you should buy, I would say it'd be that Evolution chop saw. That thing cuts so nice. So all I have to do is basically put that miter together nice and tight, make sure everything's tight to the ground, and just weld that up, and then do the same thing there. See the piece all welded together? That's what it looks like underneath. Same thing on the other side. So that's going to sit right on top of your belly pan side panels. And then you're going to slide that up to where it needs to be, right where we had our marks, our white marks. So I'll line that up like that. And then I took some 2.5-inch pieces of that 1.5-inch, 1/8-inch steel. What we're going to do is it's going to sit right on top of this V frame, I guess you would call it. And it's going to go right in there. You want to make sure you have the same space on both sides in between. And that's going to go right tight onto the panel. And then we're just going to weld that right in there. And then after we get that done, we're going to put a bolt up through the bottom of this piece here. And it's going to bolt that, and that's what's going to hold the front. All right, all finished up. The only thing I have to do is put a bracket in here. Actually, put it back here. And I'll go from this point to the tunnel. And just make sure when you do that, you make sure that you're 4.5 inches or 5.5 inches from here to here. You may have to push this piece in that way a little bit and make your bracket. And again, the drive shaft's going to be getting cut, so you can actually cut that if you wanted to now, somewhere around there, but you want to make sure you leave enough room for sprockets. So that's what it looks like. By far the most difficult part probably of building this thing is getting all the cuts and contours on the belly pan. You see how you have 2 set screws, 2 self-tappers up there into the 1/4-inch steel, and then down here still going to put a little L bracket in behind the plate that'll hold that from moving in. Here I have the pieces. I just have some self-tappers in here, but it's good and strong. Block off plates in. Get self-tappers in there. Do the same thing underneath here. So pretty much everything's tight, so there's nowhere really for the snow to get in now. The other thing I got to do too is put some more tack welds on this piece here, all along here, on all 3 sides, and then grind off those welds that are up underneath behind the metal plate there. I guess that's about it. So let me know in the comments if what you guys think of this thing, and if anybody's actually gonna venture out and try to build one. Curious to hear. So I'll see you on the next video.